Human beings are at the top of the evolutionary chain, but in spite of their intellectual perfection, Homo sapiens are a brittle creature. We constantly need energy from outside sources to keep us alive. Therefore, all of human history and civilization is really the harnessing of nature's power to get warmth and food. But along with the warmth of fire came mortal danger. Sometimes fire devoured entire cities. Then came coal, oil, natural gas. And each time humans step by step learned how to harness newly appearing resources from the planet. The history of harnessing the most powerful resource, that is nuclear energy, is no exception. Radiation causes diseases, and there were atomic bombings and man-made catastrophes. But over the more recent half of a century, humans have learned to control atomic energy better and better every day. Now the atom has become quite a peaceful thing. It lights, it warms, it moves our countries. This is the exact place where the peaceful atom got its start. This is a symbolic place, the legendary Kurchatov Institute. It is the cradle of national nuclear power. For over 67 years, the main building's facade hasn't changed much, but this panel has appeared over the staff entrance. What do these green numbers mean? Let's ask a random passerby. What is radiation? I'm not a physicist. I can't really explain precisely. Tell us, please, 8 microrengens per hour. Is it a lot or a little? I don't know. 8 microrengens per hour. Is it a lot or is it a little? I don't know. I've no idea. This is not good for a human. Are you afraid of radiation? Yes, I'm afraid. Why? Because I suffer from cancer myself, actually. So you think this is because of radiation? Maybe. Do you think one has to be afraid of radiation? Well, if it's on a large scale, you know. So this is dangerous to humans in any quantity? Well, I think so. It is well known that a lack of knowledge gives birth to fear. We're trying to make sure that nearly everybody will know everything about what radiation is and whether one has to fear it. You know, the question is, does someone need to hide from it? Maybe stay out in the sun less? Or maybe they need to shut their doors and windows to their apartment, or never get an X-ray, or never take long-distance flights. Or perhaps maybe they need to live very far away from nuclear power plants. We will answer these questions, which are important to each of us. We can teach you how to coexist with radiation. Radiation surrounds us from our birth to our last breath. Invisible particles are in the air, soil, water, food, and in each of us. Yes, we are also slightly radioactive. In our tissue, there are chemical elements which are biologically necessary for our organism: potassium, rubidium, and their radioactive isotopes. However, it is impossible to touch, taste, or smell radiation. Humans don't have a sense of radiation, which would give them a signal of radiation's presence. The only possibility for us to perceive radiation is to measure it with the help of an instrument like this. This is a dosimeter. Switch it on and it runs. And these clicking sounds show us that there's some radiation around us right now. Two completely opposite processes are always happening inside us: the death and recovery of cells. In natural conditions, our DNA molecules and their radioactive particles damage up to 8,000 junctions per hour. Our organism independently repairs nearly the same number. People believe that low doses of radiation produce a stimulating effect by training the human biological protection system. Evolution provides us a strong margin to any external impact, including radiation. This is the natural environment for all plants, animals, and also humans. Its values differ by dozens or even hundreds of times, but this depends on different places around the globe. If we take natural background radiation in Moscow, in comparison to the same type of measurement in southern China, well, it'll be 3 times higher. In Kerala, in India, it will be nearly 37 times greater. Brazil's Guarapari beaches are natural radioactivity record breakers. Local values of natural radioactivity exceed that of Moscow by 160 times. I would say that a normal person doesn't even need to turn to scientific data, but to logic, to think about radiation. If people have lived for thousands of years here, and examinations involving higher background levels are carried out, still, the cancer rate in these places is no higher than in places where the background radiation level is significantly lower. In other words, it is natural, and nature has built in its own system inside of us to accommodate these levels of radiation in human beings. In Russia, natural radioactivity levels vary insignificantly. And perhaps in St. Petersburg, things are a bit better because of the beautiful granite embankments. Well, let's check. So we'll switch on our dosimeter here and put it on the barrier wall to see what the radiation level is. Looks like it's 3 times more than in Moscow. Well, this is nothing horrible or supernatural. Simply granite extracted from underground always contains a little bit of uranium. The science which deals with radiation's impact on living creatures, radiobiology, has done fundamental research over past decades. These scientists unambiguously conclude that a human being is not able to regulate the natural radiation level around him, which is not harmful for his health. Even around these Neva River barrier walls, everything's fine. The guidelines which are being set forth are 10 times lower. Therefore, everything that's related to the natural background radiation is absolutely safe and natural to the environment. Take a look at this pie chart. It is 100% of the annual exposure dose. Natural radiation emitted by radionuclides existing everywhere on Earth is in this diagram. On average, it makes up to just 5% of the annual exposure dose received by an ordinary person. Where do we get the rest from? For example, from here. First, let's take a look at the skies. One more natural radiation source is the nearest thermonuclear star, our Sun. There is no single place on Earth where this invisible cosmic ray, which is in essence a flow of radioactive particles, can't reach. The dense atmosphere substantially reduces their energy. Therefore, a radiation level directly depends on height. Again, if we take Moscow's background radiation, over 1 hour as the conditional unit of measure, the least exposure dose will be on the sea coast, in Sochi. The cosmic radiation is nearly 30 times lower than in Moscow. Otherwise, Highlanders receive a dose twice as great as Muscovites. A dose taken over a 1-hour flight on an airplane at 12 kilometers is 50 times greater than the Moscow reference value. But pilots of supersonic jetliners at a height of 20 kilometers get about 130 times more than the average Moscow resident. But the cosmonauts are really the people who are the most affected by radiation. They are closest to the sun. The Russian Institute of Medical and Biological Problems has studied this problem for more than half a century, directly at the low Earth orbit level. Twice, hero of the Soviet Union Viktor Savinych is one of those people who experienced solar radiation effects. He traveled to orbit 3 times. His total stay in space was more than 252 days. He spent 5 hours off-board of the station in open space. Well, naturally, I asked about the dose of radiation that I received. The doctors told me everything would be fine. Look, they said you've got no more of a dose than if you would have gotten a few x-rays. This calmed me down, but I didn't feel, I didn't really feel anything, neither on my first, nor my second, nor my third flight. I talked to the guys who I flew with, and they also said that they didn't feel any effects from the radiation. The The scientists at the Institute of Medical and Biological Problems so far don't have any precise data on the degree of effects of solar radiation on the cosmonauts' health. Theoretical calculations have shown that after a prolonged stay in low Earth orbit, during 1 year, it is possible that cancer risk will increase by 3% and that of cardiovascular disease by 10%. However, this solar problem has nothing to do with us ordinary Earthlings who are on the ground. And on the ground, we can't really regulate solar radiation, but we have evolved to coexist with it. The dose on Earth of space radiation we get is a direct result of space rays. We need to look at this with some sort of value. Let's take a unit of measure, say, millisieverts. In general, we get about 1 per year. But if we take a flight in orbit, a cosmonaut can get up to 20 of these over 2 or 3 weeks. So we close one more sector. Scientists estimate that the natural radiation coming from space accounts for the same annual exposure dose as the dose emitted from Earth, which means an additional 5%. But my main concern is the larger sector. It is the 60%. Where does this come from? In the search for this answer, it's high time we take a look at our homes. We've already said that on the Earth, natural radioactivity is not very large, but decay of natural radionucleotides in the ground leads to the generation of radioactive gas, radon. We breathe it every day. And where does most of this come from? What do you think? You won't believe it, in our own apartments. Radon comes to our homes via several paths. Together with natural gas, it is released during cooking, where gas stoves are used. With water, it can come to us from artesian springs. Together with elevators, radon can be dragged from basements, like through a piston. Radioactive gas is released by some building materials our apartments are built of. But most of all, it still comes directly from under the ground. Radon is an inert gas. It has no color, no smell, and is heavier than air. Radon has 2 isotopes, of which one emits radioactive particles. Uptaken into us by breathing, they get into the human lungs and irradiate the person from the inside. Specialists call this internal exposure. A very good solution to the radon problem is to give up smoking, because you are most susceptible to radon when you smoke. This is the Oktyabrski settlement in the Chita region. Here there is an abnormally high radon content count in the apartments of the local residents. In some houses it exceeds the norm by nearly 200 times. In the 1960s, the Oktyabrski settlement, by mistake, was built right above one of the largest uranium deposits in Russia, and now radioactive gas comes out directly from underground. Therefore, each resident of the Oktyabrski settlement is given the opportunity to celebrate a housewarming party in a nearby town, Krasnokamensk. In essence, this is the capital of the national uranium mining industry. Half of Oktyabrski settlement's families have used their right to resettle elsewhere. Well, certainly I want to resettle now because everything is closing down here. There are no stores already, nothing's open. Sometimes you can't even buy bread on the weekends. You have to go to the city. The situation in the Oktyabrski settlement is unique for this country. But even here, doctors have not revealed a link between an increased radon content and human health. What of our ordinary apartments then? However, each of us, if a person wishes, can reduce the radon part of our annual exposure dose. Residents of private houses, summer cottages, and luxury houses built on the ground breathe in much more radon than others. The gas is accumulated in basements and spreads all around the house via chinks in the floor and gaps in the walls. The second rule of safety is to choose correctly the room you spend most of your time in. It turns out that most of the radon in your home comes from your bathroom. If your house's water comes from an artisan well, then its concentration in the bathroom may be 3 times as high as in the kitchen, or up to 40 times more than in the living room. Let's do a simple experiment. Let's leave a radiometer in the walk-in bathroom. Turn on the hot water on high, and the water comes from an ordinary water supply pipe system. Radon ingress into the bathroom is made easier by the generation of steam from the water. Look at the instrument readings. In just 5 minutes, the water bath in the bathroom has made the radon content in the air increase, though insignificantly. If we now turn off the shower and open the door in the shower room, the radon concentration in the air will come back to the previous value in half an hour or so. The things we've just seen give us a third and very simple rule. Ventilate rooms as often as possible. Radon escapes your home with even the slightest draft. So we have found out that in some regions it is safer to take a bath than a shower. And one more thing, we have an explanation regarding the largest sector of our pie chart. Radiobiologists estimate that natural radiation, which comes from radon, is accountable for up to 60% of the annual exposure dose. This is the largest fraction of the natural exposure. Mankind has known since the olden days that radon in small doses is not hazardous, but even somewhat healthy. The rejuvenative effect of radon baths has been tested over centuries at popular spas such as Wiesbaden, Pятигорск, and Bela Kuriha. Wounds heal faster under radon. The nervous system calms down, the heart works a bit better, and blood pressure can normalize. Because of this treatment, patients receive a cumulative dose of radon radiation of about 30 or sometimes up to 100 times exceeding the normal background level. These tests are not dangerous, however, because this level is equal to the amount that someone would get on a flight from Europe to, say, India. Now look, we have one more piece. A rather large piece of our chart remains unexplained. It accounts for nearly 25% of the annual exposure dose. And what is that? You won't believe it. It's medicine. Radiation is used in medicine for both treatment and diagnostic purposes. The most well-known source of radiation in medicine is the X-ray machine. In terms of an exposure dose, one X-ray used to be about equal to a 12-hour flight on an airplane. Today, one stomach X-ray is about equal to 1,500 hours of time on an airplane. These numbers are starting to look pretty good. Maybe it's time for medical professionals to start handing out X-rays more blindly. As we look at modern data, we can see that X-ray machines don't seem to have any long-term harmful effects anymore on patients. Well, we've found explanations to nearly all the blank spots of our pie chart. We receive 10% of our annual exposure dose from the ground and from the sun. Nearly 60% comes from breathing in radioactive gas, like radon in our own apartments. Some 25% are added on later by medical examinations. 4% more we intake with our food. But where are the nuclear power plants, the nuclear tests, Chernobyl, man-made catastrophes? Oh, here they are. Well, yes, when we sum up the numbers, we can't believe our eyes. It's just 0.8%, and this number never exceeds 0.1% of the overall share. Many people may not believe these numbers, but they are confirmed by international experts. It is believed that in Russia, many Russians are frightened of radiation because of unclear, confusing, or incompetent information. But proceeding from what I know about Russian nuclear power plants, I believe that they are relatively safe. They operate efficiently, reactors are within containment protocols, and the number of units is known. In other words, I believe they're fully safe. Foreign experts think that the scales of nuclear catastrophes of the past century are exaggerated in the consciousness of the minds of most of us. For Russian citizens, it is still difficult to get used to the idea of living in a world with radiation. The most terrible consequences of the use of atomic energy are the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as well as man-made catastrophes like Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island. Studies of the consequences of these tragic events have led to the development of modern radiation safety systems. Scientists have found answers to simple and clear questions. What is the maximum safe exposure level? How to treat radiation disease. To understand this, one has to go to the city of Ozersk in the Chelyabinsk region, to one of the most secret facilities in the country, the Mayak facility. A veteran of the industry, Vadim Borodin, who received one of the largest irradiation doses in the Soviet Union, lives here. This is the place where in 1948 the first nuclear reactor in Russia started up. It was developed especially to produce plutonium for the first Soviet atomic bomb. The work ran round the clock, but at that time nobody thought about radiation safety. Life-threatening operations were performed with bare hands. It was a different time, different priorities. The Soviet Union needed an atomic bomb at all costs. Radiation disease of the lightest degree at a dose of 1 to 2 sieverts is cured by self-treatment. In other words, a person who has to be surveyed to detect potential cancer in the future. Radiation disease of the second degree, when we speak of 2 to 4 sieverts, needs treatment because 30 to 50% of people may die without any treatment, but all will survive if the treatment is appropriately administered. The timing to produce the first atomic bomb was so tight that Mayak's workers poured the deadly metal manually into platinum mugs using golden funnels. Also, manually, they carried vessels between the operations. Over time, working at the facility, Vadim received a dose of radiation at about 1,500 times higher than modern safety guidelines would allow. Doctors consider it an acute radiation disease. We had vacations at the time. Vacation was 48 days. They divided this vacation by 2, so we had 24-day breaks. So you'd have one half, revive a bit, and then go on. Basically, they were trying to reduce radiation disease at the time by just reducing our time at work. Medical professionals have found out that high radiation exposure first affects blood-producing systems in humans. This is how the blood of a person affected by radiation looks through a microscope. If you look, there's almost no lymphocytes, and lymphocytes greatly affect our immunity. If you magnify it by hundreds, you'll be able to even count the number of chromosome junction breaks, so-called decentrics. Radiation's impact on humans is measured in sieverts, after the name of the father of radiobiology, a Swedish scientist, Rolf Sievert. Today in Russia, the maximum safe dose of exposure to man-made sources for the general public is established at 1 millisievert per year. Here it is, at the very bottom. Nuclear workers are permitted to receive doses up to 20 millisieverts a year. Look here. But medical professionals think that the annual doses less than 100 millisieverts do not harm the human organism. In essence, this is the maximum natural background radiation on the planet. Radiation disease is induced starting from 1 sievert. In other words, a dose should be up to 500 times. So it is extremely difficult to get radiation disease being exposed to permissible environs. It's practically impossible. In its latest recommendation, the International Commission for Radiological Protection, and this is the basis for all natural guidelines, states, basing on all scientific data, that at doses below 100 millisieverts of a one-time acute exposure, an intensive one, no effects have been found by science and won't be found. With this, one has to understand that we speak about exposure to nuclear facilities, and they are set forth by 10, 100 times less than what is treated as safe. In other words, a nuclear power plant produces 1,000 times less than 1 millisievert, or 10,000 times less than the natural radon exposure level considered safe for the general public.
Everyone can check the radiation background at nuclear facilities in Russia at their convenience. Just go to the website, russianatom.ru, and you'll see a map showing all of Rosatom's facilities in Russia. Click on, for instance, the Kalinin plant, which is closest to Moscow. All the data is changing without any human interference. There's no chance to fake the results. We see a dosage rate of 9.6 microrengens per hour. This corresponds to the natural background gamma radiation that would be there anyways. This is a very effective system to trace what's happening at plants across the country.
If this exhaustive information had been in place just a quarter of a century ago, it would have been possible, perhaps, to reduce the negative stereotypes and bad attitude that people have in Russia towards the peaceful atom.
As for me, I've got to say that I'm not afraid of radiation. I ride my bike, and you know what? In terms of safety, your bike is more dangerous than radiation.
Europe is liberal not only in terms of social life, but also in regards to radiation safety guidelines. For instance, if you are to drink milk in Norway, be aware that it may contain many more radioactive elements permitted in foods than are permitted in Russia.
Well, personally, I'm not afraid of radiation because I myself have worked in the nuclear industry since the 1970s. Therefore, neither my family nor myself are afraid of the radiation. Well, if you're not a nuclear power plant worker, or you don't reside near a natural uranium deposit, or you haven't been subjected to beam therapy, you can safely live in peace with radiation. According to our Ministry of Health's information, of 24 risk factors affecting the death rate in the country, the leader is tobacco smoking. More than 17% of all deaths are due to nicotine addiction. Bad nutrition falls within nearly 13%, and obesity is at 12.5%. Lastly, alcohol kills nearly 12% of us. Thus, radiation, both natural and man-made, even is not considered a risk factor for the health of the general public. Why? Watch our next release.